They're coming after your homes. Property owners have had an unbelievable run, benefiting from decades of policies supporting ultra-high house prices. But that era could soon be coming to an end as governments turn the tables and start to target property owners. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I had just finished my prostate exam when the nurse walked in and said the words that no man ever wants to hear. Who the heck was that guy? And you'll hear plenty of words you don't want to hear if you listen to my content, but you might actually enjoy a few. So please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Die Hard is a Christmas movie and no one can change my mind.
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
The first thing that piqued my interest was the New Zealand Greens proposal for a new wealth tax.
Let's say you're a widow, your husband died 20 years ago, you've got a house in Mount Eden which is now valued at $3 million because of the rising house prices.
I don't know about New Zealand, but there's a crap load of properties in Australia worth $3 million or more. Just go to Sydney and nearly every house within 6 kilometres of the CBD is probably worth over that amount. But because house prices have gone up so much, it's going to be extremely tempting for governments to try to cash in and get some extra taxes from those ultra high house prices. And one of the clearest indications of that is this proposal from New Zealand.
I mean, that person would pay $25,000 a year in tax, right?
$25,000 a year in tax for that poor widow living in a $3 million home. Now that's a fair bit of tax, especially if you might be asset rich but income poor. And I don't think she could sell and downsize to avoid the tax. So even if you sold, you'd still have the proceeds of that sale. So what will the poor widow do?
Just to get it straight though, so it's on assets over 2 million. So
As an individual.
So assets over 2 million for an individual or 4 million for a couple. And that's net assets, so they take off any loans. So is this a good idea because they're wealthy and they can afford it? Or is this proposal just setting up a dangerous precedent where those who have accumulated wealth over time are seen as easy targets to try to grab more tax from? But the fact that this is being proposed and your home is included in your net assets is really something significant. If this sort of policy was proposed in Australia, I feel there'd be an astronomical backlash, especially because house prices are worth so much here and so many people have accumulated massive wealth.
So what would that person do? I mean, if the person living on superannuation, living in a house, you can't eat your house.
No, you can't eat your house, but governments want taxes. And because house prices have gone up so fast and so hard, many people are suddenly considered wealthy. And because of that, you gotta pay your tithe. And many of these people wouldn't even consider themselves wealthy, especially in the case of the widow. There might have been a couple who are just middle class working at full-time jobs, were lucky enough to buy a home in a good area, and over time as the housing bubble soared, that house became worth a fortune, and when the husband passed away, the net assets were easily over 2 million. And just say you capped that 2 million figure for 3 years, over those years there'd be a lot more people whose net assets rise, and then they'd be liable to pay the tax. So quite often with these new taxes, at the start, they might only affect a small amount of people, but over time, the numbers often increase.
You're paying $25,000 a year tax?
As I've just said, that payment could accumulate to the point of sale. So if they don't have the real world income to be able to pay that at that point in time, it could then be paid off at the point of sale or then at the point at which that person passes.
So if you can't pay the wealth tax, it can accumulate and build up over time, and then you might have to repay it when you sell the property or when you die. There's nothing like dying and having to pay a massive tax bill. I just know that if anything like this came in, those who are impacted will be doing everything in their power to look for loopholes to try to avoid the tax. So yes, I think there'd be an extreme amount of backlash, but there's now so many people who are struggling financially in countries like Australia and New Zealand that many would probably support the idea of taxing the rich more. And that's the trouble when countries start seeing a widening wealth gap. It creates division amongst citizens. So instead of everyone fighting for lower taxes, one side's happy for the other side to be targeted.
The trade-off that we get for that is that we can end poverty by ensuring that no one falls below the poverty line at a guaranteed $395 per week.
Ending poverty is a big bloody call. With the cost of living today, if you're surviving on a welfare payment, I'd say you're pretty much definitely in poverty. Because by the time you pay your rent, your bills and food, you'll basically have nothing left. But they seem to be proposing a bit of a distribution. Take extra tax from the rich and then we'll be able to raise the welfare payment. Now this proposal would be a negative for those with large amounts of assets and probably a small benefit for those without any real assets. But in Australia, we sort of have the opposite. Housing policies like negative gearing and capital gains tax discount overwhelmingly benefit those who already have a high income or a large amount of assets. And that's why in Australia, there's probably millions of non-homeowners who'd be more than happy to see those with multiple properties get taxed to the hilt. And because the vast majority of wealth in Australia is tied up in property, if Australia did pursue a wealth tax, that'd be 100% going after property.
So that widow that you're talking about will experience a society in Aotearoa, New Zealand that is flourishing, where people are not struggling to get by, and ultimately that's for the benefit of all of us.
So will wealthy property owners be thrilled about paying more tax so the government can distribute those extra taxes for the benefit of the country? Would wealthy people leave the country taking their wealth with them to look for a lower tax place to live? But as governments seem to be addicted to spending and their national debts keep soaring, they're going to be looking for more and more ways to recoup money, and a wealth tax is definitely one thing I know that they're going to be looking at.
Yeah, but you're putting that sort of person in a pretty tough position. If they had to pay $25,000 worth of tax just for living in their house.
These are the kinds of conversations that we need to be willing to have rationally as a country.
You know who else has had a really freaking difficult time lately? Every single non-homeowner. COVID policies sent house prices soaring, locking out millions of Australians from ever owning their own home. Combine that with mass immigration levels, and renters have been forced to play the Hunger Games just to try to secure a rental, and many have found themselves homeless. This group has been completely abandoned, but also seems to be forgotten in national conversations. I mean, just look at interest rates. Yes, they've gone up and some property owners are struggling with the mortgage repayments. But guess what? Nearly every property in Australia has seen massive capital gains, especially over the last 4 years. But a renter hasn't seen those capital gains. High house prices have meant that their rents have surged, and even if they sacrifice every single little luxury in their lives, they'd still probably have to save over 10 or 15 years just for a home deposit in most major cities. So because of that night and day contrast between the two groups, there's probably a stack of renters in Australia who'd be more than happy for those who are well off to pay a truckload of tax.
We have had in the past, off the back of world wars and the Great Depression, we created the welfare state, public healthcare, public education, public housing. And yes, we paid for it by higher taxes on those who had profited handsomely during a time of hardship for many. And that is something that we have done in the past and we can choose to do again.
But if the government did break in heaps more tax, would they manage that money wisely? And would it bring a significant benefit to the community? It's hard to know. But personally, I'd like to see less taxes rather than more. I'd like to see Australians keep more of their hard-earned money. I'd like to see house prices become more affordable so that many more Australians can enjoy the benefits of owning their own home. It's only because of crazy house prices that there's so many millionaires in Australia. But because there are so many asset-rich people in Australia, all the government would have to do is put in place a small wealth tax and they'd receive a crapload of tax, which they desperately want.
There will of course be individual circumstances where specific people feel as though they are disproportionately impacted, and we deal with those issues on the margins.
In other words, too bad, so sad. You got assets, we're coming after them.
But what we are talking about here in reality is wealth taxes on the top 3% in this country, which then unlocks the resources necessary for all of us to live better lives and for our country to be ultimately happier, healthier, and more productive.
I don't know about the more productive part. Wealth taxes might actually discourage some of the most productive in your society. But when you frame it as only impacting a very small percentage of people, that's how you can get the majority of the country supporting it. Now, that was just a proposal from New Zealand. But why do I think Australia's going to start coming after properties? Well, the main reason was that a Treasury report was recently linked stating that the government's budget's in big trouble and they need more taxes.
The Albanese government has been advised the budget cannot be fixed without raising taxes and cutting spending, and that its housing target is unachievable.
We all know that governments typically don't like cutting spending, so raising taxes it is. Now, there's plenty ways you can raise taxes, but if you look at Melbourne as an example, they've gone full Burko on taxes and fees for property owners, and the federal government may just follow suit. Another way the government could come after your properties is if they were to introduce an inheritance tax. Countries like the UK already have an inheritance tax, and it's something that would be extremely appealing to the government, especially since asset prices have gone through the roof, as this would mean the inheritance tax portion will be quite significant. So property owners, get ready because they might be coming for you. I'm Biko Konstantinos.